and I would like to go to another reading. And the reading that you chose is you went to India also to interview folks, and this is really interesting. Before you read, talk a little bit about and the book display. Oh yeah, let's bring up the book display, please, Shyla. Magically bring up the book. That Here we go. I shouldn't say Shyla because Shyla is not a magician. The book
It's like
display.
magic.
It is.
It does feel like magic though,
But I
doing
gave
this.
it
I'm
away that
really.
Shyla is putting it up. No, Shyla didn't do it. It comes up by telepathy. Uh, the What's going on in India is also really worrying. I wanna bring up a slide here from a documentary. Let me just look this up here. Yeah, from Anand Patwardhan, and I actually contacted him. I hope that he will come to the program. He is not an author, but he's an excellent filmmaker. This is a film called Reason: The War Between Faith and Rationality. Quick trigger warning: this slide that I'm bringing up may be disturbing. This is slides from the movie, which is about the resurgence of I shouldn't say resurgence, but the dominance of Hindu nationalism and the incredible violence perpetrated against the Muslim minority. So, before you read, Angela, what's your sense of what's going on in India now? Setting up a little bit this excerpt that you're reading.
But so much to see the direction that the country has gone in under the current government. It's been this slow slide for a very long time, but it's become genuinely a dangerous place for religious minorities, for intellectuals who believe, something different from the government, who still have faith in a kind of secular India. Um, it's really, truly horrifying. And, friends of mine are affected. What is particularly shocking to me is how radicalized ordinary Indians have become.
Yeah.
Members of my own family, I know, have become Hindu nationalists in the last few years, even though they started off as, completely secular before. And
And why do you
that's
think that is?
terrifying.
I mean, if you look at, you don't have to name any names or saying how you're related to them, but what is your explanation for that particular person? What's the entry drug? How do they slide into believing that they're so superior to this in this multicultural setting?
Oh, for the family members I know, it's WhatsApp. WhatsApp has been the main
Mm.
vehicle for spreading misinformation around, and kind of fueling ethnic tension and religious tension between groups. The lies that get spread on that platform are just shocking. Um, and it's terrible. I mean, it's horrifying to me that the platforms don't do anything about it, that Meta just treats this as no problem whatsoever. I was just reading in the news today that um, apparently Meta is being sued for ethnic violence in Ethiopia, I think,
Hmm.
or communal
Hmm.
violence in Ethiopia. Well, I would love to see it sued for what it has helped do in India, because India has become a radicalized country, a religiously nationalist country, because I think in large part because of misinformation spread online.
This is really amazing, folks. WhatsApp. I mean, my dad would say, "Well, I don't look at any social media. What a waste of time." My dad is very smart, informed guy, but of course he's using WhatsApp. So WhatsApp, that benevolent thing where you share pictures of your cousins and your babies and your baby shower. Yep.
It's pretty awful. But the thing is, I mean, I do a lot of work around misinformation. I run a group under the Royal Institution in London called Challenging Pseudoscience. And for the last few years, we've been looking at how particularly scientific misinformation spreads. But these platforms take barely any responsibility
Mm.
for the fake news that travels on their platforms. I have absolutely no trust in any of them to deliver us, reliable facts about the world. And one of the problems is that WhatsApp in particular, when information is shared with you by someone you know and trust, like a family member or a close friend, you are more likely to trust it than even if it were in a newspaper that you read regularly, because that is a friend, that is someone who's
Right.
opinion you respect. And that's part of the problem, that misinformation can spread at the click of a button. Often, how many of us haven't shared something without really thinking about it first? And so we
I
spread
have
this.
to
We don't
agree.
understand
Guilty as charged, but I was wondering why
Mm.
does it though with folks who you would assume have some critical notion about especially when you're talking about demonizing another group. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, do you think that there
Mhm.
is um the name escapes me of that author. We have the book in the in the other room. It was written in the 40s, an American author about the authoritarian mindset. Um, that there is a sort of I want to say grooming that happens maybe in childhood through certain ways that makes one mind more susceptible to another one in accepting authoritarian hierarchical thoughts. Now I'm becoming a scientist here saying, where is the gene? Where is the gene that makes
I
one person more prone to this than the other one?
I don't know about that. I think I don't
No,
know
I'm just
what the
kidding. I
scientific
think
evidence
those
to
are
support that.
cultural. Yeah, obviously.
But what I can say is that what these platforms are doing and what politicians do, populists do, is they tap into latent anxieties that people have, whether that's fear of the foreign, fear of immigration. In India, of course, after partition, there is this lingering resentment and anger and tension, lingering tension between Hindus and Muslims. Um, and that is what the populists play on, rather than trying to dampen that and create a more cohesive society, an inclusive, loving society in which everyone can coexist. What they do is play on those fears and amplify them until they become dominant as a way of explaining, all the ills of a country, whatever that is. It's the same thing that the Nazis did in Germany. They demonized the
Yeah.
minorities in
Or
order to
former
be able to
Yugoslavia.
strengthen their own hand.
I was just gonna say partition happened, so long ago, 1947, but why is it still happening? And then I'm
Mm.
thinking, wait a minute, Yugoslavia, Germany, right now, all these ideas, there's simmering underneath. They're just waiting to be re-weaponized, and they're weaponized right now. Let's do this reading.
Yeah. And those
If do we need to set it up? Sorry, I was interrupting. Please go ahead.
say that these prejudices already exist in us. This reading that I'm about to do now is not about religious nationalism, it's about caste. So, caste is this system, this Indian system of social hierarchy, if you like. It's kind of similar to race in some ways, similar to class in some ways, but some geneticists, Indian geneticists I interviewed, were convinced that there was something biological to caste, that there was some biological basis to it, which of course we have absolutely no evidence for.
Real quick, in 15 seconds, what is the caste system? God, Angela, I know our program is like, are you crazy?
I wish I wish I could explain it. It has similarities to race and similarities to class. So there is within it's not just within Hinduism. It kind of transcends Hinduism, but really within Hinduism there is this hierarchy, if you like, or separation of different groups. And each group, and it's very complex, very, very complex, but each of these groups is thought to be suited to a particular role in life, whatever that is. So, for example, my family, my dad's family, Saini, so my surname Saini, in the 19th century was designated as a martial race as the British. So, my grandparents fought in the wars. And the reason for that was that they were seen as this race of people who were good at being in the military, loyal
Hmm.
fighters. That was their caste. So there are castes for all different things. And even though today in the 21st century, that clearly makes very little sense and people don't live according to their caste designations, India is still a very casteist society. If you go to the top universities or go to any university, private schools, there's a huge overwhelming preponderance of people from the upper castes, and including in the professions. In the professions, they're dominated by people of upper castes.
But see, that's not so different from what the Germans proudly called their type of meritocracy. We have a three
Mm.
prong basic school system where the kids are basically being divided after fourth grade into either a vocational track or a university track or something in the middle, professional managerial class track. And you talk to people here in Germany, well, like they would say, well, that's perfect. People have different interests, and people have different skills, and somebody's just good with their hands, and somebody else is good with their brains. And I find it nauseating. It seems to me quite similar, actually. Of course, the argument in Germany is always is like, yeah, but then later you can do evening classes and then you can go back to university, which I think is
Mm.
delusional because you have to come from a background where you can afford to have someone sponsor you to go back to school at night while you're working. Anyways, I'm going off these tangents. These are not tangents. This is all
Level.
interrelated.
Imagine if that were done at the group level, that the second you were born, your life was already mapped out for you, that,
Mhm.
your career, your life expectations were all already decided. That's, if you can get your head around that, then you can start to understand what the caste system means in India.
Well,
So I'll start reading now, if
yeah.
you like.
Before I continue with
Okay.
saying, in essence, in practice in Germany, it is similar just because of the cost of living and the other factors that factor in. But thank you, because this, I think, demystifies a little bit the caste system. I always like to ask our guests with knowledge in that realm to further explain it. Without any further ado, please do read.
Effects of culture, we can't help but dream up biological mechanisms to explain it. The freshly unearthed travel diaries of Albert Einstein, written around 1922, have revealed that even he formed generalizations as he toured the world, despite being an anti racist humanitarian. He described the Chinese as an industrious, filthy, obtuse people, adding, "It would be a pity if these Chinese supplant all other races." Perhaps he imagined, like the builders of the old human zoos, that our differences run all the way from our habits into our bones, that to know one Chinese person is to know them all. Biologists Marcus Feldman at Stanford University and Saini Ramachandran at Brown University have suggested that the missing heritability that scientists have for so long struggled to find in our DNA when it comes to intelligence and other complex traits may in fact be explained by the magic ingredient of culture. New scientific tools help us understand our genomes better, but they've only reduced the proportion of intelligence scientists now believe to be heritable. Feldman and Ramachandran ask the obvious: why do scientists not look elsewhere for explanations? In the same way that our parents pass on their genes to us, they also pass on their culture, their habits, their ways of thinking and doing things. And this can happen over generations. It is so sticky and persistent that it can seem biological to an observer. That is why measuring differences between groups, even over long periods of time, is laden with error. We are social beings, not just biological ones. The evolution of the Indian caste system is the perfect example of social determinism, Indian biologist Shankar Singh wrote in 2001. Studying the biological differences between castes, Singh started to understand it as a system defined not by evolved differences that made people better at different things, but as a set of barriers maintained by society for so long that it felt as if they were in the blood. Lives and choices were constrained by the invisible forces of culture, and so everything remained stratified. Everyone kept their position, fear of stepping out. We don't change easily. But we can change. As societies do shift and inequalities finally flatten, then we start to see our assumptions overturned. Stepping out of a rigid, unjust system can prove just how flexible we really are, just how far outside our genes our differences really may lie. In April 2018, a study was published into the performance of Indian bureaucrats hired as a result of affirmative action policies. The Indian Administrative Service, one of the largest and most powerful bureaucracies in the world, is also one of the toughest places to land a job. Of the 400,000 people who apply, only 7,500 are invited to sit a grueling exam, of which as few as 100 or so will be offered a position. Controversially, half of those vacancies are then reserved for marginalised castes, whose slightly lower scores would usually disqualify them. A common assumption has been that even though these help redress social inequality, the quotas must have an impact on standards. If people are given a leg up to get in, then surely they can't be as good. Some believe that those born into lower castes are innately incapable of doing these high status jobs well, regardless of their actual socioeconomic position. But when they investigated one particularly large sample project, American scholars Rikal Bhavnani and Alexandra Lee found no statistically significant differences in performance at all. Improvements in diversity can be obtained without efficiency losses, they concluded. Caste had no impact. Indeed, the minority applicants who got through the usual way, without the quota, tended to perform somewhat better than average.
There you go. Angela Saini, wonderful reading. Thank you. From the book Superior. It's here on the table. If you click on it, you'll get to Angela's website. Let's get rid of this book display. And we have about 10 minutes left. Questions are coming in and comments. If I missed your comment or your question, please repost it in the chat because the chat goes by very quickly. Where was I going to go? Oh, yeah. Since we're running out of time, we're going to skip the third reading. But in the third reading, the term race realists comes up. What is a race realist? I think you mentioned in the
This
beginning,
is
but
the
explain, define. What a wonderful term.
it's the kind of moniker that modern day scientific racists have given themselves. So what they're essentially it's a euphemism. What they're essentially saying is that race is real. So we are race realists. And there are so many euphemisms around scientific racism today. There are phrases like human biodiversity, which again is a dog whistle for
Hmm.
there are different human species or races or breeds, and that when we talk about biodiversity, we are talking about human diversity in terms of those different breeds. They're very clever. They're always moving and changing the way that the rhetoric that they use and the language that they use in order to seem more acceptable and to give themselves space. The frontier at the moment is academic freedom. You know, a lot of these there are a
Ah,
number of people who have a lot of um, far right white supremacist views working within academia. The defense they always give to the kind of race research that they do is academic freedom.
hmm.
And unfortunately, we don't have a good rejoinder to that because, of course, all of us are committed to academic freedom. So
They
how
this is
do we
unbelievable.
argue?
Yeah, I heard if you want to sit down, you just have to turn around and click on the chair. Thank you
Oh,
for
yeah.
defining this term. In fact, this is also happening in Germany with this academic freedom. I heard a very interesting radio reportage about that. It's there was a professor who was having anti-Muslim views that she espoused, and a student was complaining, and then the professor was saying, "Well, this is academic freedom, and you don't want to be in a stifling environment." And in that reportage, it was eye-opening to me to see how organized that is. Again, I mean, Angela, in your book, you write about that. These are not these are uh, globally networked groups who have talking points ready to go. That's you can see at the similarity of these talking points and the rhetoric all over the world. What I really also learned from your book, which is interesting, I got to race through the rest here because we only have 10 minutes left. But what is really important takeaway that indigenous populations are often very advanced, but they're not advanced in those specific narrow metrics that the colonizers used to kind of qualify these populations, right? You use Australia as that example, but riff a little bit on that because I think that that's really important for folks to understand um, that it depends who calls the shots in determining how do we classify good versus bad versus better.
Narrative, all of that is loaded and fraught with politics. There's actually a very good book, a lot of very good work by the anthropologist Adam Cooper, looking at this idea of the primitive, how it came about, and the ways in which it was used to designate so-called or to separate so-called civilized peoples from non-civilized peoples. Of course, civilization is relative. Every people believe themselves to be the most civilized. The
Exactly.
question is who has the power in that situation, who has control. One of the most fascinating parts for me of moving to the Americas has been to start to understand at close quarters the history of indigenous peoples in the Americas. It's very complex. There are so many different native nations. But one thing they obviously have in common is having been dismissed and treated as kind of remnants of humanity, as primitive for hundreds of years, to such a horrifying degree that, you know, they weren't free to practice their cultures, to speak their languages, to wear their own dress. There's a wonderful documentary that I saw at the Margaret Mead Festival at the American Museum of Natural History just last weekend, showing in the 1960s um, people uh, people in the Northwest, Pacific Northwest, rebuilding their very first totem pole, having been urged by Christian missionaries for hundreds of years that they should tear them all down. They had photos of how their coast used to look before, with these beautiful rows and rows and rows of huge imposing totem poles that stretched along the coastline, all of them ripped down because they were told that if you want to go to heaven, you have to take these things down. And so
Mm.
they did. And it was only in the 1960s that a young man from this community decided, I'm going to carve a totem pole, I'm going to build it again. And he did. And this documentary kind of followed that effort. It was heartbreaking. And it starts to make you realize how different our understanding of humanity and the natural world might look, how different science might look and academia might look if entire knowledge systems and cultures hadn't been consigned to that dustbin of, you know,
Mm.
primitiveness for so long.
Mm.
It's only now, you know, in very recently that people are now revisiting the cultural practices, the knowledge practices of indigenous communities, and starting to realize actually, well, there is so much that we missed here, so much that could be useful for us as we destroy the planet in our rush towards late stage capitalism.
And again, Hawaii comes to mind, and thank you for putting this so well. In Hawaii, just also very recently, maybe 20 years ago, they started with teaching Hawaiian. They have Hawaiian language schools now. The language was forbidden. My wife did not learn Hawaiian. Her father didn't learn it. Well, he spoke it, but it was not allowed in school, and it was. I mean, it was suppressed, but it was also seen, and you still see that from the colonizers who are now calling themselves tourists, going to some of these countries. This tongue in cheek, but they go to countries on vacation, go like, oh, look how cute, look how that language sounds, huh? And they see it sort of as sort of an anecdotes that they can tell in their cultured home at home, that they visited some primitive place with a language that has double vowels and a lot of consonants and whatnot. So that kind of arrogance from the milieu that I'm from, as a white middle class German, that I find that nauseating. I have to sometimes in large family gatherings have to listen to stories of people going to far away places and talk without the no sense of how arrogant and privileged and unreflected they sound. Just keeping going. But now I'm going off my tangents again. Where were we? We have 5 minutes left. Um, yeah,
Mm,
uh, last question. What would you add? The book came out in 2019. Is there anything that you're dying to add, or
mm.
that you maybe even would add if there's a new edition coming out in the forward, possibly? But what has happened in the last 2 or 3 years? I'm thinking of, again, of the massive disinformation that we've seen during COVID, and on social media. You mentioned WhatsApp. What comes to mind to me is also this relentless war, I have to call it, on LGBTQ folks, on the notion that gender varieties are somehow a suppression of people. I don't know, that it all falls in there. But what would you like to add now if you would write it today?
Updating my reporting since the book came out. So I just have a co-authored series in the Lancet Medical Journal right
Mhm.
now, looking at race and health. I had a piece in the Lancet again in November looking at gender and health, sex and gender and health. One thing that worries me is this creeping essentialism that's coming back into debate, not just on the right, but also on the left and progressive circles. This implication, for instance, I heard during the pandemic that drugs tested on white people won't work on black people, which is just downright ridiculous. I mean, that's just madness. Having diversity in clinical trials is not because drugs tested on white people don't work on black people. So that kind of nonsense, I think, is still circulating, but from well-intentioned corners. It's coming from people who want to improve disparities in healthcare. What they don't realize is sometimes it's very easy not to see the problems where they actually are, which are often social problems. It's because of how we live and how we're treated, not because of some fundamental genetic differences between us as groups. Um, but we're still working within that old paradigm that says
Mm.
that difference is fundamental, it's biological, it's not something that society shapes and influences. So a lot of my work now is about um, combating that, and it feels like pushing against the tide very often. But I mean, conversations I've had recently, I am hopeful that we will get there, not just with regards to race, but also with regards to gender. There's a lot of sex essentialism, gender essentialism. And my new book, The Patriarchs, which comes out, as you say, in about 3 months' time, really synthesizes a lot of that. What I do in that book, which I've been working on for a very long time, for about three years now, is ask, can we identify the roots of patriarchy? It's one of the fundamental questions of human history. How did we become male dominated? How did this happen? And we'd never interrogate that question. I think part of the reason is we naturalize it. We just assume that it has always been this way, and it
Mhm.
hasn't. So in that book, I bring together issues around race, colonialism, empire, um, the primitive, but also go all the way back into prehistory to ask, how did we get here?
Amazing. I'm going to order it right now. In the pre-production meeting with Shyla was saying that the patriarchy. I talk to people who think like, "What are you talking about? The patriarchy? We overcame that, just like just like racism." It is quite baffling, but there's light at the end of this tunnel. Angela, Saini, thank you so much. I hope you had a good time in the strange world that we inhabit, in this kind world of a society where we don't discriminate if avatars are super geckos, blue, have blue skin, or who else is here in the audience who are sort of mechanical cyber people or whatnot. So um, this is the future that liberals
Well,
want,
I've
Angela.
well, we say that about all new technologies and then see what happens. But it's been wonderful. It's been such a great privilege and honor, and thank you so much for having me and for listening so patiently to my ramblings.
Not at
And it's
all.
been lovely to see you all as well, your avatars at least,
The
if not your
avatars
real
is our
faces.
talking about essentialism. This is the essence, but in a good way. Um, I'm gonna run through the credits real quick. Thank you, folks. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, audience here in world and on YouTube. We apologize. We had the YouTube stream restarted. There's an issue right now with YouTube. We're on it, but all the videos are, I'm going to sequence them. And so in the description, you see where the next one is. I'll do that right after we end that. Kitten Duo is supporting us with a super chat. Kitten Duo, thank you so much. We love you, Kitten, and we hope that I'm actually really glad that you made it because today was a irregular time at 10 a.m. Usually we're on at 12. If you enjoyed this program, please consider tipping us in world. The tip jar is right there in the back. That's the dragon statue reading a book. Panny, thank you for your donation. And you can also join the YouTube channel. You can also donate via PayPal. I'm not a friend of the people who are associated with PayPal, but it is convenient. It takes a lot less fees than YouTube does. Quickly, the credit slides. Book club every Wednesday, 12 o'clock Pacific time for suggestions for guests. slbookclub at draxtor.com. We're booked through the end of 2023. I'm starting to book 2024. It's really an amazing lineup of a big mixture between literary fiction, nonfiction, political activism. Really psyched about the lineup that we have. You can check it out on the calendar. The book club is produced by Isabel Sharon, Shyla, the Super Gecko, and myself. The location manager, master builder is Ruby Geek. By the way, the venue that we're here now was originally built for Professor Kristen Gotzi from Penn State, anthropologist, author of also many good books. Um, but now it's Angela's place. Sorry, Kristen. That's we have to repurpose the set. We don't have unlimited space. The avatars are made by Ruby and Bespoke Caravan. Research by Shyla and Monkey. Next week we have either way you can say we have no guest, or you could say we have a lot of guests, because next week is a free for all, which means that we have a casual discussion about books. Bring your favorite books. If you want to read something, if you're an author, if you want to read a poem or an excerpt of something you're working on, please direct message me or email me so that I can set it up. Otherwise, I'll prepare something. If you have topics that you'd like to discuss, also direct message me or email me. And that's next week at the regular time, 12 o'clock Second Life time, also known as Pacific time, or Pacific time, also known as Second Life time. This is the Second Life Book Club. Thank you, and see you all next week.